Turn the car on in the garage, and my fucking porn came through the Bluetooth.
Masker. I heard Dean Blundell smokes crack. Was actually the first to smoke it with Rob Ford, I heard, too.
What's Dean got to do with it? Frankly, my dear, I don't give a Dean.
States rated R for, restricted and for a little bit romantic.
What do we got?
What is that in the background?
What is that over there by the mic?
Is he making wallets?
What is he doing?
What's he doing?
It looks like he's... Never mind.
What's he doing? What? Is he dead?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Let's start right out. Hey, what happened?
Hi there, welcome. We're back. It is the Dean Blundell show for kind of midweek-ish, early midweek. Nice to see everybody. Good to have everybody. We're taking a break from Crazy Town for the next couple of days, at least I think we are.
Maybe.
Yeah. And really happy that we're joined by our next guest. He's a member of Parliament, not provincial Parliament. This is the big leagues. He's a member of the big leagues. For the Liberal Party, MP from the Beaches, please welcome Mr. Big Time, Nate Erskine Smith, ladies and gentlemen. We got the big time government guy on today, everybody. We got a guy, and he's using like government issue tech, right? He's using government issue tech, so he sounds incredible.
Yeah, this is direct from the Parliament of Canada. This is we send this to our witnesses at committee so we can understand what they're saying. It's
You know what we're hearing? What we're hearing there? Taxpayer dollars.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
Can you bring in a plane?
Hey, Nate, are those the same standard issue government microphone headphone set that you sent to the Kielburgers? Yes or no?
I believe they would be. Yeah, they must
Okay,
be.
good. Yeah,
They did not wear theirs though.
No, of course they didn't.
Didn't want to mess up their hair.
That's one thing from the government they didn't want.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. So see,
I'm
we're
gonna
already there. We're
I'm gonna
already in the
enjoy this.
conversation, right? Because Nate Erskine Smith, who's an MP in the Beaches, he's a Liberal, but he's voted against Liberal policies where he saw fit. He's a merit-based cat, which is I was so fucking excited to have him on today to talk to us. Sorry about the language, but again, I mean, you just started with a salvo. I mean, I love it. I'm really thankful you're here. But why are you in the Liberal Party then?
Look, party politics are the way you got to engage in our system as it is. And when I took a step back and thought about entering politics, the party, as it relates to leaders that I've looked up to, as a student of politics, Lester B. Pearson in particular, but also Pierre Trudeau. And when you look at the total collection of policies and the principles that are brought to bear, the Liberal Party made the most sense for me. And at the same time, you had Justin Trudeau calling for younger people to get involved in politics in terms of generational change. He was really rebuilding the Liberal Party in many respects, and he called for open nominations. And you talk about merit-based voting. Well, he and his leadership was talking about free votes and empowering parliamentarians, and that really spoke to me as well.
Mm-hmm. Have you been? How many times have you voted against your own party in the last few years?
I don't know. It's not an overwhelming number, but enough that I've lost count.
It's around 50.
No, really?
Yeah. We already knew the answer.
We've been
Someone's
keeping
keeping track,
count. Nate, we've been keeping count.
Someone's got to.
But one of the most impressive ones that I think, because look, I'm not going to trash your party or anything like that. Like, I don't really like any of the parties, and I'm pretty equal when it comes to that kind of stuff. But on paper, the Liberal Party is really attractive if you just look at the fact that you're taking issues from a place of reason and rationality instead of being dogmatic. On paper, conceptually, the Liberal Party is probably where I would be. If it aligned exactly with those kinds of principles, but it does in a lot of ways. But what I wanted to really give you credit for, because I think it deserves being mentioned, even though it's years later, is that you were really vocal about how the party broke the government broke the promise on electoral reform.
Sure, that was probably the most difficult time for me personally, because in the nomination that I mentioned, these open nominations, I had knocked on doors and said, this is an issue that really matters to me. And this was before we even made the promise. And so it mattered a lot to me. Just as an example, there's one individual, he was in his 80s when I signed him up in the nomination. He'd been a member of the NDP at different times in his life, never been a member of the Liberal Party. I signed up, him and his wife, talking about electoral reform, and he said, "Oh, I'll support you in the nomination, but I might never vote for you, Nate, as it relates to the general election." And then not only did he vote for me, he helped out, contributed, and he ended up coming to my swearing-in ceremony in Ottawa. And so to have someone like that who is aligned with me on electoral reform, certainly, and is such a central part of my community-based politics here in Beaches East York, to go back on my word with people that are in my community that I trust and that are part of my team, it didn't feel right, and it felt right to stand up and say the opposite.
I'm not. I just quickly, because I don't want you. I obviously don't. I'm not looking for sound bites for you, like speaking ill against your leadership or party. But
I've always
wanted to know what the reason was. Like, what was the political strategy behind not doing that? Was it as simple as saying we won't win as many seats next election if we do this?
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think probably some in the leadership had a view that ranked ballots were the right way forward, that they didn't really see an easy way forward with the fraught conversation around proportional representation. And then when it came down to it at the Electoral Reform Committee, there was basically a compromise position as between Conservatives and the NDP to say, put this to a referendum. And the Prime Minister and team were quite opposed to the idea of a referendum, thinking it was incredibly divisive. I took a different view, but that was the view that they were expressing.
Fair enough. Yep.
We should probably get a question from the communist on the panel. Dean, you're up.
Yeah, and I'm not a communist at all.
He's been called a communist about 30 times today. So
a couple on Twitter though, Nate. That's it. But I want to
been called worse.
Oh, I'm sure you have. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to touch base with you as we're starting this conversation. We don't get a lot of big swinging federal politicians on the program, and I regret calling you a politician because it's a terrible thing to call somebody right now. But and you don't operate like one, and I appreciate that about you.
We had Randy.
But again, we don't get a lot of politicians on this show.
I hope that's a low bar that I exceed.
Hey, did you see that? Did you see that Randy Hillier interview, by the way?
No, I can't. I hope nobody watches when he speaks. You
got to go watch it, Nate. You have to go watch it, Nate.
Yeah, we'll send you a couple short clips so you don't have to waste your life. Yeah.
It was fantastic.
But here, I'm gonna knowing, and we've covered the fact that you're merit based. And you're not like the rest of them. That's a nice way for me to say it. And yes, we've studied you, followed you. We've done some research. James is a big proponent of you, and he's super centrist, but in a smart kind of way. He's not centrist for the sake of being centrist or anti for the sake of being anti. He's merit based. We all are around this table. We all are. That's how we vote. That's how we look at policy. That's how
Most of my votes are protest votes. I'd like to get that out right now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but it's in Alberta, so it doesn't count. So, but
the Green Party's going to win someday. I'm telling you.
No, they won't. But my question to you is this, and it's a serious question. You're in the Liberal Party. You're part of these meetings when it comes to COVID preparedness, the rollout, vaccines. You're seeing Ontario go through its fourth wave. You're an Ontarian. You're subject to the same rules, regulations, lockdowns, all the stuff that we're doing. People are dying. People are getting sicker. Variants of concern are a major issue. In fact, they are the issue right now. I think we had 3,700 people get infected today. We had 4,600 people yesterday. We had 63 people die last night into today. What are you guys doing? With all due respect, who do we leave a comment card for about the terrible service that we're getting here in Canada? Who do we talk to about when we get these vaccines? Why have these vaccines not shown up? I know it's I don't see a lot of people criticizing their own party, and that's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm just asking you, as someone who's in these meetings, who's in the know, why are we here, dude?
Yeah,
what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few different things to say to that. One is it's tough to talk about Canada in the context of COVID when different parts of Canada have responded and are experiencing very different outcomes. So when you look at the way that Atlantic Canada has responded versus the way Ontario has responded, outcomes are different because they have had different responses. Now, the federal government principally has been focused on supporting individuals and businesses in need. You see significant outlay of financial resources to that end. And my own view, it's not been perfect. There have been gaps as individuals have fallen through some gaps as it relates to evictions, and there have been businesses that got money, like the telcos that shouldn't have got money. So it hasn't been perfect, but overwhelmingly, I think that's been a really serious endeavor. And when you look at the public health response, it's a challenge federally. That early on, I was someone who was saying, we might want to look to the Emergencies Act to make sure we have a stronger federal role, but if you don't take that kind of proactive approach early on, and the provincial premiers certainly pushed back against it, and I understand why the federal government then took the view that they did. Healthcare and on-the-ground delivery is the restrictions, the failure of some restrictions or the success of other restrictions, like in Atlantic Canada, principally is a provincial effort. Now, when you look at vaccine delivery, I went down a rabbit hole on the industry committee looking at this to some extent, and it's hard to work through exactly what could have been done differently successfully when you've got this global arms race trying to nail down vaccines for your own country when we don't have domestic manufacturing capacity. So some areas of potential criticism here: the UK invested in domestic manufacturing capacity before the pandemic. Okay, we didn't. And conservative governments didn't, liberal governments didn't, but that's a legitimate area of criticism. Without that domestic capacity, what do you do? Okay, so really smart people came to a committee from the expert task force and said, diversified portfolio approach. Okay, so look at the portfolio. So Moderna and Pfizer, having spoken to the minister pretty early on, we entered into contracts with those two companies. AstraZeneca, maybe there's room for criticism there. You saw the UK take a pretty, all-in approach. Not quite all in. They have Pfizer too, but they went really hard on AstraZeneca in the spring. We didn't, and so we entered into a contract with AstraZeneca in September. Maybe AstraZeneca, people have some concerns about. Really focus on Moderna and Pfizer in terms of what people seem to want, but it still would have been, I think, a really useful additional tool to have to a greater degree. You look at Johnson & Johnson, we're one of the few countries that have it. When you look at the total list of countries that are ahead of us on vaccine supply, they are countries that either have capacity like the US and UK. They're countries that are very small, and so it's easy for them to jump ahead. They're countries that are relying upon Russian and Chinese vaccines, which I don't think made any sense in Canada, wouldn't have played, would have been a non-starter in some respects. And there, you point to Israel, no other country has been able to replicate that deal with Pfizer. So I think there are probably some, and look, we'll learn with hindsight. We don't know the contract details in terms of price. So it may be in the end, we would
You have no idea how much the Liberal government paid for these vaccines?
No, I only know publicly available, with COVAX, we spent $220 million for 15 million vaccines. So it works out to about $15 a dose. But for the specific contracts relating to Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, no. I put that question to the minister, and she said, look, like I need to balance. We have got confidentiality clauses in these agreements. I want to balance the need to be transparent with the need to not screw up our relationship with these companies when we're still very heavily reliant on them. So look, I don't know. That may be, look, we're the 10th largest economy in the world, and if we didn't pay the dollars that we should have to get early supply, that'll be room for criticism, but we don't know that yet. So it's tough. Like I've searched for answers to this question too, is what could we really have done differently, and where is room for criticism at the federal government's feet on this. And I think on vaccine supply, it's hard to point to exactly what we could have done to make things so very different when everyone wants these vaccines and we're not the US and we're not the UK.
But is there in the spirit of hindsight being what it is the initial deal that was attempted to make, the one that ultimately fell through with the Chinese company that is owned by the state, right? And I'm not doing this libertarian talking.
That's a good question. We get it a lot. Yeah,
and I'm just curious, in hindsight, obviously that it's for all of us, it just seemed bad politically, even at the time, even people who don't think that way, just because of what was happening with the two Michaels and what was happening with Huawei. How do you say that company's name?
Huawei.
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 Okay.
Huawei.
Sounds a lot like Yahweh, and I'm not religious anymore.
Yeah, so that deal though with CanSino, so that came up at our committee too. The president of the Public Health Agency of Canada said, "No, we didn't put all our eggs in this one basket. This was one attempt at many attempts to try and find a vaccine that was going to work, and that had nothing to do. That was sort of, you got to divorce portfolios here. So my understanding, at least, you've got Minister Anand, who's tasked with procuring, going off and dealing with companies and procuring, and then this deal was an R&D deal, and so that was outside of her portfolio entirely. So it had nothing to do with what her job was, which is go and get vaccines from these major companies. So my understanding
I guess the criticism is that
the
criticism is that it delayed deals that you would have made with other companies while you were waiting, and then
and the answer to that, I think, is a firm, at least what we got from Public Health Agency of Canada, the president there at committee, was a firm no, right? Like in writing, in response to questions afterwards, he sent us a submission to say this did not delay us at all because it was one of many endeavors, and it had literally nothing to do with the efforts to enter into contracts with companies that were developing vaccines on their own. So like that gets held out, and it's easy to criticize, right? And I was criticizing the treatment of the Uyghurs in China. I've been at a press conference for Amnesty International calling out their actions as it relates to Hong Kong. There are all sorts of reasons, and the two Michaels, the hostage diplomacy, who go on and on. And so the idea that a deal like that was going to work, they clearly blocked it for political reasons, and so that fell apart. But I wouldn't say that hindered our overall response in any way. That was one of many irons in the fire, as I understand it, based on what I'm told.
I have a question, and it's a stock question, Nate, that I ask all politicians. Are you concerned about the growing level of hatred for politicians as a whole?
Yeah, I would like to see more trust in politics. One of the reasons I got involved in politics is because, I'm a bit of an academic nerd as far as it goes. So I studied politics and political philosophy and jurisprudence between Queen's and my last year, an unnecessary year at Oxford. But like when I think of the way one thinks of politics as a really noble way of making a difference, and then the way people actually think about politics and politicians, hugely divorced from one another. And I go in grade 5, grade 6 classes, and I try and change their minds. They don't have they know that, people have this negative perception of politicians. I try to explain politics means collective action fundamentally, right? We can't solve problems on our own, all problems at least, and collective action translates into government, which translates into politics. And so politics really matters, and we should ask, people to run who care about not just winning elections, but care about the right ideas. So yeah, I really worry about the idea. Are people
backing out of getting involved in politics because of where we're at right now with how divisive things are?
I don't know. Honestly, I've been doing this long enough to know if it's worse in terms of pushing people away. I get the sense that there isn't as much collegiality maybe across the aisle at times as there has been in the past. At the same time, for me, and I speak personally only, whether it is Michael Chong or Michelle Rempel or Eric Duncan, or whether it is Murray Rankin, Nathan Cullen when they were in Parliament, or Daniel Blakey or Don Davies or Elizabeth May, like I have relationships with folks across the aisle, Peter Kent, Bob Zimmer. I mean, Charlie Angus. There are lots of people who I am able to work with. I obviously don't agree with them on everything, but I think we do have to put aside our differences and try to work together as much as we can. So I do worry that politics gets in the way of that too at times. Yeah. But I don't know, the historical lens. I'm probably too much of a novice and too new to really answer that.
Leads me to my point. How long before you stop being this nice and you're like the rest of them?
Yeah. When does the bitter set in?
Just tell me to just quit. It's like you're past your prime age. It's like that's that. You're done. Yeah. Like
when do you have to turn the TV off when your boss is talking? Or are we there?
I don't turn the TV on too often. I question period is tough to watch for me. I don't know how people tune in every day,
dude. I always look several things that have kept me out of politics over the course of my life. The fact that no one wants me to get into politics is one of them. But the other thing is
me though.
is when I know, but you're an academic. You went to Oxford for nothing, you said, so you might as well get into politics, right? But when I watch question period, like I'm glancing by it and I see all the stiffs and I see people arguing, and and I hate meetings. Like, I really hate meetings with lots of people, and all that looks like is a massive meeting with a lot of people who are there to grind axes and not actually get anything done. So like, I don't know how you, like, question period, when you have to show up for it. Does it suck? Do they have snacks? Like, can you go, listen?
You're not allowed to eat
pages
snacks.
who bring you water, so it's not the worst,
Yeah.
What about liquor?
No liquor. I think that used to be a thing. It's no longer a thing.
Still a thing for Hillier.
It is. Okay, it is.
It hasn't been a thing since Joe Clark. Let's be honest.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think that my own perspective on question period is it is predominantly theater. Yeah, it's not. There's not a great value. There can be value though, right? So if I quite like when we moved to a back and forth format of about, I think there were 5 minutes of back and forth exchanges when we first started the virtual parliament, because it was a slightly different format. We were in committee of the whole. That was quite effective because it didn't require this sort of 30-second snappy question and then a 30-second non-reply, and then there was an opportunity for an exchange and getting some answers. Some ministers are really good. Like, I would say Carla Qualtrough is really great. If she doesn't know an answer, she'll say, I'll get back to you, or that's an issue that you're raising with me for the first time, and I'm going to take that away, and I'll deal with you offline if it's a particular case file that you need support on. So some ministers are really open and are quite good at building that trust that you talked about before. That, I do think the more we revert to talking points and just say the same canned lines again and again and again, people tune out and they lose that trust also. So at the same time, I'll say question period is for opposition parties, and they can sometimes really effectively use that time. So if they are coordinating their questions, hammering the same issue that is relevant, has been in the media, and then they're highlighting it, they can really bring certain issues to the fore in a serious way. And it doesn't have to be about sort of the scoring points, but if they're legitimately raising an issue, the government sometimes at least responds. So it can be effective, not always effective.
When question period was good, when it was when Tom Mulcair was questioning the Conservatives over the Senate scandal, because before that, it's the way it always is, was just grandstanding. Mr. Speaker, this person did yada yada, a lot of adverbs used, a little bit of an insult, and they sit down. The other person gets up, they do their boilerplate response, maybe do a little zinger and sit down. But Mulcair was just like, when did the Prime Minister know about the check from Nigel Wright? And he sat down, no grandstanding, nothing. So Harper's grandstanding in response, which is what he started, and then he went to really short boilerplate, it was such a juxtaposition because it was a really simple prosecutorial type of question. And I was like, maybe this will change the culture of question period. No, it didn't change.
No, it hasn't.
Have you guys ever tabled the idea of putting a cage on the floor?
Not that I've not seen that motion come before us, but
you can
consider it when it comes before us.
You can have it, Nate. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Only good ideas here on the show.
Yeah, we don't have any bad ones yet. We don't fail. But the government has, and not just federally, but provincially, for whatever reasons, and you've explained as many as you can according to what you've heard. Let's dig into like the provincial stuff if you can, Nate.
Yeah, sure.
You're an Ontarian, Beaches East York MP, youngest ever, by the way.
Increasingly no longer the case, but yeah.
It happens, dude. You're not going to outrun Father Time. But when you are watching, and you know what's happening federally, right? Whether or not you're being told the truth or not, that's another thing. But then you watch what's going on provincially. And you are a federal minister, so you're a federal minister even though you're from the beach, for all of Canada. There are so many provinces that seem to have figured this out. Yep. Ontario is not one of them.
No.
Why?
So probably I'll say
honestly, Nate, don't snow me here, bud.
No, I'll say a couple of fair things and a couple unfair things to the government. So good. I would say that obviously Atlantic Canada doesn't have the urban population that Ontario has, and we've seen the greatest hotspots here in Toronto and in the GTHA. So that obviously is a reality that Ontario has that Atlantic Canada does not have in the same way. Also, when you look at travel and international travel, and this gets to, potentially some room for federal criticism there and maybe joint criticism on both levels. But Atlantic Canada obviously doesn't have incoming groups and individuals in the same way that Ontario does from overseas as well. or the traffic from on the border as between the U.S. and Canada. So that's fairly. I think there are some differences there. I think the criticisms that I think are, just to be direct, they haven't listened to the science in a way that they should. When you hear
the Ford administration hasn't listened to the science the way they should.
Right. So when you listen, I think if Kathleen Wynne had been the premier, lives would have been saved. I think if a liberal premier had been the premier, lives would have been saved. I don't think that's up for debate at the moment, given what we've seen. There's a good reason to be a liberal. So when it comes to the recent comment from one minister, I forget who, but who said, "Well, we wanted to see how the modeling would play out in our ICUs," and you scratch your head going, no, the whole reason you have the modeling is so you act on the modeling to avoid it becoming a reality in your ICUs. Anything less is a dereliction of duty. And that's, there's a real frustration, I think, across Ontario, certainly in my community, that's just what we've seen, a dereliction of duty.
Is it, because to me, it's criminal. Like, people are dying, Nate. To me, and I know the government's in Ontario trying to close loopholes so that they're not legally accountable after this whole thing gets settled, and you count the death toll and the long-term injuries, long haulers that are suffering from lung transplants or bubbles in the lungs or diabetes that is brought on by this, or strokes or seizures. I mean, we're talking hundreds of that. We work with one, Brenton on tour. Guy was perfectly healthy, got COVID. Now he's on 2 puffers and he can't go up a flight of stairs. He's been like that for one single year. Mental health issues, not to mention those. Yeah. Thanks, Locke. Yeah. Should someone, and should we not be able to ask for answers at the end of this? Because this, to me, the way that Ford has played with lockdowns and easing restrictions, not going by the science, as you said, is a dereliction of duty, and people have died. To me, 1 + 1 = 2.
We unquestionably need a review, and I would say, not in a partisan way. I've heard Aaron O'Toole say, I like Aaron, by the way, but I've heard Aaron O'Toole say, we need a review after all this. And it's under this sort of branding of these liberals and their constant failures, and we need to hold them accountable. I actually don't think it should be framed in that way. In the same way we had a review out of SARS to know what went wrong, what went right, what do we need to do to ensure that we are better prepared for something like this going forward. We need a similar, it obviously needs to be much further reaching than that review, because that review, think of the impact of SARS versus the impact of COVID. So we obviously need a much further reaching review, a more significant review of not only expenditures and what worked, what didn't, and what was wasted, what was well spent, but also how well did our political leaders listen to the science? How well did other political leaders with the very same information respond differently, and how many lives were saved as a result? I think some really tough comparisons do have to be made, and some really tough scrutiny does have to be brought to bear. And whatever the fallout of that is for my government or for provincial governments is all fair, because we have to stand by what we've done.
Do you think that the Liberal Party might be, I don't know, it's a tough decision to make, but you don't want to see public inquiries as a partisan tool. And if it's as big and important as we all believe it is, wouldn't it be refreshing and kind of productive for the Liberal Party to call the public inquiry themselves?
Yeah, honestly, I haven't turned my mind too much to this question. So maybe is the answer. It sounds reasonable the way you frame it, but I have
a silver tongue, Nate.
Like, I haven't turned my mind exactly. We're in the we did debate this at one point, where there was a conservative motion to say provide all this documentary disclosure, and there are folks in the scientific community, including Dr. David Naylor, who was the chair of that SARS task force that I mentioned, who went out there and said there will be a time for a postmortem. Now is not that time. And we are still living at now the apex of a crisis here in Toronto and here in Ontario. And whatever the review ought to look like, we know there ought to be a substantive review. Of course, it should not be from a partisan lens. But I haven't really turned my mind to exactly the machinations of all that, because my focus right now is, frankly, pushing the federal government and the provincial government to ensure we have greater supply in Toronto, and that we are actually prioritizing based on hotspot and not just per capita, because surely we want to save lives with the limited supply we got.
We live in interesting times, Nate, with respect to how people can reach public figures, and you're obviously one of them. What do you engage with people that are crazy like like how do you approach that if somebody in your constituency contacts you from that perspective?
So it's a good question, and I would say it differs depending upon, are people in good faith bringing a concern to your attention, or are they just trying to be shitheads about it? And so I have an example. There was a vice principal at my old high school. She was now a constituent, and long story, but I knew her better than others because she got me involved in work for acting, because her kids were in acting when they were kids. Anyway, so all that's to say, I knew her. I thought, great, I'm hearing from my old, an old vice principal here, and she was raising concerns about vaccines, and that, there's not the science here, and worried about a very strong anti-vax position. And so for someone like that, I laid out the case. I sent links to her, and I said, I know you are obviously firmly in your view based on what you're sending, but I hope you consider this evidence. I've done that with others as well, and certainly sort of one good faith reply. And at some point, it goes nowhere with many people, but the best you can do is lay out the evidence. And others who are clearly just in bad faith, being obstructionist or wasting your time, or worse, just you read my inbox and see some of the horrible things, and it's not that bad for me in comparison to some of my colleagues. Certainly, I mean, there's no response. No one's operating in good faith in that regard. So it depends. And I would say on social media, out of the context of spreading misinformation, I think there is value in responding to trolls at times, simply not to get into a protracted back and forth, but because you don't want to give them a platform to spew whatever they're going to spew without correcting it, so that it's not really for them, it's for all the other eyeballs that are going to see that and to see, okay, Nate's correcting the record, and here's how he's correcting it.
Nate,
you know what I found that works? Sorry, you know what I found that works is mocking those people. Traditionally, that ends the conversation. So if you want to expedite your day, Nate.
So look, that was in some cases is my inclination as well, but sometimes in this position one also holds one's tongue. Not always, but
we had a quick conversation before you jumped on, Nate, and it was sort of a comparison piece about whether or not you would do a better job than Chris Sky. I'll let you know you're doing marginally better.
Much better.
You're a little bit more coherent, and yes, and you don't look like you're on some illicit drug. Just
not right now.
I am.
No, that's not true. I joked that I was a criminal when I went to Parliament, and then I legalized the one thing that made me a criminal.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you're one of the guys that ushered in the cannabis age.
You're all welcome, by the way.
By the way, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. We do a brisk business in that industry, actually. So is it you? I think. Is it you? I think
you can thank me personally if you like. Yeah.
Are you a pot smoker?
I really like actually. Tea and the houseplant lemon soda water, whatever it is.
Yes.
I otherwise prefer vaping, but to teach their own. I've got friends who still prefer blunt wraps, so it is what it is.
But you'll dig into a blunt once in a while, right? If you're cutting loose on a weekend and your really super cool politician friends come over to smoke a bowl.
Politician? No, so that doesn't happen.
You mean lawyers, Dean?
But COVID times, like the experience of sharing a joint obviously is like a communal activity, but COVID times has put that to bed. So
not now.
But you do want to decriminalize all drugs, from what I understand.
Yeah, I spoke in the House this morning, actually. That's why I'm wearing a tie. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wearing one.
Sorry, missed it.
Yeah, well, 5 people saw it, I think, so that's okay.
Yeah.
I spoke about the need to regulate all drugs according to their respective harms, and then a step towards that being decriminalization. And the bill that the government has put forward, actually pretty near copies and pastes as it relates to the drug policy piece, at least, a private member's bill that I put forward. And it doesn't get us quite to decriminalization, but the language that I've seen used in an analysis of the bill from department officials was it will make it virtually impossible for prosecutors to successfully prosecute drug possession for personal use. And
all drugs like we talking coke?
Yeah, all drugs.
Talking heroin, MDMA.
All drugs. Yeah.
Ayahuasca, is that another
LSD
drug?
and shrooms are the only ones that matter.
Psilocybin, shrooms.
Yeah, so actually,
all
all of them. But psilocybin is an interesting one insofar as I think there will be a
it's
lot
awesome.
of. So it's been a while, but I would say it's got really promising potential as it relates to its medicinal benefits.
Sure.
And so in the same way we saw cannabis actually fought in the courts and courts really pushed governments to act to provide a medicinal framework.
Yeah.
We're not so very far off that happening with psilocybin, I don't think.
On the heavier drugs, Nate, do you think that decriminalization in the country would bring down the overall participation, or do you think it would just increase it?
I don't think it would make a measurable difference one way or the other, except that we wouldn't be wasting cops' time and we wouldn't be penalizing people for something that isn't a crime. Fundamentally, if you consider a crime a moral wrong, there's clearly no moral wrong with personal drug use. There's, in some cases, the number I saw recently from the Global Commission on Drug Policy, I spoke with Louise Arbour recently, who's a member of that commission, and it's something like 250 million people around the world use drugs, however they count, but 10% use substances in a problematic way. So there are obviously people who do need help, and we should treat patients as patients and not as criminals. But there are lots of people who use recreationally, and the criminal law is no answer to that. In the end, education. How do we bring 50% of smokers down to 15% of smokers? We did it through education and restricting commercial advertising and restricting.
Take out the filters.
But also, but what you're doing as well, I think, is the backbone of something like this, because I think the Portugal model is the one that's usually cited, is that in Canada, especially in places like Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, you'll be able to divert all of that money that you always waste, that police budgets waste, busting people smoking joints or, having a gram blow in a club or something like that. And you can divert those funds to actually fighting the kingpins and the dealers that bring them here, right? Isn't that the idea?
That's the idea in large measure. I would say decriminalization doesn't fully answer the problem of organized crime. And when you think of, in Canada, we have organized crime, of course, but organized crime and cartels and the significant profits that are generated by the illicit drug trade can also, they don't obviously destabilize our government, they destabilize governments around the world. And so there are so many knock-on consequences in a really negative way of the war on drugs that, corruption and violence are fueled by the war on drugs and the profits that flow from it. But I would say decriminalization absolutely allows us to better focus our public resources on the things that matter, and sure, tackling the production and distribution of potentially harmful substances makes far more sense than criminalizing the people we want to help in the first place, of course. So there's that. I would also say we're in a place right now where we need additional resources towards just health response, right? So we have over 17,000 Canadians who have died because of the opioid crisis since early 2016. And we've brought a number of measures to bear to respond to that, but we absolutely need increased treatment options. We need increased safer supply options, and we really need a much stronger health response overall. And it makes eminent sense to stop policing so much and to really have the health response that we need.
Do we know where the fentanyl is coming from? Because I don't remember hearing this word when I was younger. And then all of a sudden, it was almost like overnight, it was like fentanyl, and it's in everywhere. And they're putting it in Coke, and they're putting it in E, and they're putting it in
they're making it now largely in these countries, right? I mean, I think they used to. Yeah. I think the China thing was the pipeline there for the beginning of it, but now
Mexico's a big one too. Yeah.
Mexico makes it now, right? Like they just right there. Yeah.
And the problem
a lot of trailer parks around the United States too. You'll find a whole bunch of that stuff.
And that's why. That's a perfect example of why decriminalization is an important half measure, but a half measure nonetheless, right? Because you've got a situation where you obviously want to destigmatize people who use drugs. You want people to access treatment, and the criminal law is the largest stigma we have in our society that pushes people out of the healthcare system that need to get the help that they need. At the same time, how are people dying? They are dying because of a toxic poison drug supply. They are taking a substance, in many cases, most cases, that they don't mean to take in the first place. So we need a safer supply. And that really comes down to a better regulatory approach and strict regulation.
So here's a question for if you're into, because you tabled a bill a couple of years ago that didn't succeed about decriminalizing all drugs, right? All illicit drug use, which when you wrap your head around everything we've been told our entire lives about drugs, it's a weird notion, right? But the way you explain it brings up other questions. And I love the idea because you're freeing up, as you pointed out, resources where you would normally be chasing these guys for a dime bag, and two cops challenging him. One cop breaks his leg and then he's got to go on, workers' comp. I mean, there's so many different resources that you could free up just by decriminalizing, but regulating is a different part of that equation, right? Like, are you suggesting that we develop a cocaine enterprise here in Canada with like clean coke, same thing with heroin, same thing with MDMA? Is that what you're suggesting?
We may have a guy for you. He was on yesterday.
He makes most of his stuff in the garage, but no big deal, Nate.
Well, I don't know what the right answer is all the way through, but I would say that caffeine is regulated differently than morphine, and there are different ways we can think about regulation. So I mentioned the Global Commission. They said a number of different models. You can have a pharmacy model like we have with over-the-counter. We have
that hands out Coke.
What's that?
That's awesome. That hands out Coke.
No, probably but look, we have right now in this country, we have, for those who are severely addicted to heroin, if they are prescribed a particular treatment, then there are alternative therapies, including an injectable agonist therapy. So I mean, effectively pharmaceutical grade heroin. So there are ways of looking at it through really tightly restricted, so prescription based, less, and depending upon the harm. So if you're talking about cannabis as an example, before we legalize, you would start to say, okay, well, it's not the same as heroin, but it's still against the law. How are we going to regulate that differently than we regulate, tobacco? How are we going to regulate that differently than we regulate alcohol? And so I think we do need, what I would love to see, because the police chiefs are behind the idea of decriminalization, because public health experts are behind the idea. I would love to see this in the platform. I would love to see basically the government say, you know what, we've moved forward in a significant way. We've done a lot of different things to tackle reform drug policy in a sensible way. We're going to establish a national task force made up of chiefs, made up of public health experts, people with lived experience, and others, to say, how do we update our Canadian drug strategy in accordance with the evidence, and then see where that takes us? Because I don't have all
where are we at with me being able to buy a 6-pack at the 7-Eleven? Bad timing for that?
That is out of my hands. That is you gotta, and that may be why maybe we have the pandemic response we do, because buck of beer was the top priority, right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And dude, hey buddy, listen, no offense, but your boss was on an all-time heater today as well, talking about eggs and chicken subsidies in the middle of a massive pandemic. Did you catch that? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, massive pandemic.
I didn't have the TV on.
Your boy JT gets up there and he's like, French, some stuff in French. I didn't understand it. God bless it. Not crapping on the French. I just didn't get it. But the transition from French to English, and this was all I heard. And it says COVID-19 press conference. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is like, we need to do more for people who have eggs and chickens. And I'm like, here we go. This is it. We're going to get answers right now. Like the disconnect, is that just him not caring, or is that him just not wanting to talk about the hard shit?
I'm not sure what that announcement was or what he was responding to. Maybe he
was
the
new NAFTA deal. They got 620 million for farmers with chickens and eggs.
Okay, so and was he responding to a question from the media, or was he just
an announcement?
Announcing that? Yeah. So that's, from what I can tell, it's not a push from my area of the caucus, but there is a certain segment of the caucus who is very much concerned that we entered into the new NAFTA. It's not just our caucus. I've heard it from opposition colleagues and the Conservatives as well.
Yeah, that's nice. That's great, but I would have preferred, hey, here's a timeline on the vaccines, guys, and here's the actual truth about where we are, and we're in deep trouble, and this is pretty serious, instead of talking about chickens and eggs, or sending out a tweet saying we got more coming. That's all I get from him, and I don't know him personally. I've got lots of friends that know him. They say he's a good human being.
He is.
It is just this overall approach. All parties are doing it. Right. But the guys that are in charge, which are your cats, have access to all the answers. They've got access to all the vaccines. You tried to explain the process, and I heard you several times in there go, hey, listen, this is what I'm told. This is what I'm told. So I can only tell you what I'm told. But none of us, no offense to you, none of us, I watched that whole thing today. We don't believe any of it. You're talking to people that,
No, you should.
You know,
Okay,
we-
so
we do
I'll
this,
push back a bit though, because
Okay.
I do think we've got over 11 million vaccines in this country now. There's another 2 million coming this week. We've got another 6 million, I think, coming by the end of, or total 6 million coming by the end of April.
Sorry, times two for the double dose. So it's 11 million, 22 million. Because when I hear words like
No, these are
numbers like that,
these are just total doses. But keep in mind, when you see where the UK is at, the UK vaccinated 15 million people, and only 500,000 had received a second dose. The first dose strategy really works when you see the caseloads that the UK has right now. And my sisters in the UK, they were in really rough shape for a while there, and their vaccine single dose strategy of as broad a reach as possible before we go second dose for the highest priority populations where they're at the greatest risk. That strategy makes a lot of sense on the evidence.
Yeah.
And so when I look at doses, I look at my last conversation with Minister Anand. It was, we're gonna have 44 million doses in this country by June, and that's not counting Johnson & Johnson. Obviously, there was some news today around Johnson & Johnson, but I'd still take it. And so when it comes to
me too.
Yeah.
Hey, dude, there isn't a blood clot scare that will scare me away from the vaccine.
I'll take AstraZeneca when it's my turn. I'll take Johnson & Johnson.
I
I'll
tried
take
to calm the guy. I went to No Frills the other day. This is how messed up vaccines are in this city. I went to No Frills the other day, and they've got people going, "Hey, do you want a vaccine? Do you want a vaccine?" And you're like, I'm not joking. You know how like people go and hand out. This is how fucked it is in Ontario. Sorry. Because No Frills has the AstraZeneca vaccine, right? They've got exclusive rights to the AstraZeneca vaccine. So in their pharmacies, they're vaccinating anyone 55 plus. But just like someone who stands at the front door with like a MasterCard application, and no one can get them, but there's people at the No Frills going, "How old are you? Do you want this vaccine? Can't have the vaccine. 55."
No, please don't tell me stuff like this,
dude. And it's 2 seconds from my house. And I tried to con the guy. I'm like, "Hey, listen, you can just give me a thing, right? You can just give me a vaccine." He's like, "No." I'm like, "You're standing there offering people vaccines in the produce section." He's like, "Yeah, but you're too young." And I'm like, "Okay, I guess."
If it makes you feel any better, you don't look young, Dean. You totally pull off 55.
They keep saying September. I think on the supply that I've seen coming down the pipe and the numbers that I've seen, I would say it's reasonable to think every Canadian adult who is eligible is going to get, or who wants one, is going to be able to get a vaccine by Canada Day. And we should be in a place in the summer where we're in much better shape. And when you look at 44 million vaccines, not counting Johnson & Johnson, which by the way are starting to come end of this month. Mm-hmm. So 44 million doses outside of Johnson & Johnson means 30 million adult Canadians. So every adult Canadian, that's enough supply for 1.5 doses, right? So, I would say we are in increasingly good shape. Supply obviously is still a challenge in the coming weeks, where we're not going to see the Toronto vaccination clinics able to operate at full capacity unless we really start delivering into hotspot areas. But I do think February was a frustrating month, but we're in a much better place than I think people sometimes give us credit for. And you look at the list and you're like, you're 30th, 40th on the list. And you start to move out the countries that are quite small.
Yeah, people are obsessed with that. Hey, Nate.
I know.
Everybody's obsessed with, are we 60th or 58th today?
Right. Right.
Hey, Locke, so where are we?
Nate,
44th? Doesn't matter. Nate,
I just hammer it into everybody. That's what I've been saying this on my radio show. Just get it into people. Just stop messing around. If you want it, go just line people up and start. How old you are, how fat you are, what diseases you have. Everybody needs it. We're all helping each other.
Code you're in.
Yeah. Just go get it. If somebody's willing to get it, go get it in them. I mean, anyway. But I'm not.
Well,
I'm not a politician.
I recognize the politics are also tough on this. The politics make it easy to do per capita distribution, right?
Yeah.
But when you're looking at a public health response and containing a crisis, you go where the crisis is, and you bring the vaccines to where the crisis is. And so I do think we ought to take that perspective, as much as the politics might be difficult, but that is a challenge. It's obviously not just a challenge federally, but it's a challenge provincially too. That's why we haven't seen it happen yet.
You know what I like about the conversation that we've had today, Nate, is something that I have sort of been trying to say out loud is, and I'm having trouble doing it myself, but I've been getting increasingly frustrated with where we're stuck. We're sort of stuck in this groove with how it's being reported and COVID and masks and shutdowns. And I just want the focus to be on vaccines. Tell me about the vaccine. How soon am I getting it? That should be just get us past that. And I also appreciate the fact that we're not at a point right now where we should be looking back at we should be looking forward. We shouldn't be looking back. So I hate to bring this question up, but I want to ask it because you're you're a thoughtful individual, and I bet you have an answer for this. If there was one thing that you would do differently that would have as much of an impact as possible from the start of the pandemic. So looking back at March, is there one thing you wish you or your government would have done to get us into a better place than where we are right now?
So one thing I would say, with the benefit of hindsight, and it's a bit of a cheat because I don't know how we could have done it at the time in a perfect way, would have been to really, when you look at what the UK did with AstraZeneca, try to replicate that in some way, where the contract earlier on, the investments in biomanufacturing, maybe trying to partner with the NRC. I think these were things were tried potentially, but I do think that's when I think of what potential criticism could be brought to bear. That's one area. The other is a little more straightforward insofar as the criticism I just outlined. Everything maybe had to break right. Maybe they did try and it's tough. The rapid testing piece was a no-brainer from the get-go. And when I hear we've procured only 40 million rapid tests, well, the reason we've only procured 40 million rapid tests is because the provinces aren't using them. And I remember sending notes to my colleagues around the importance of testing, and I remember the Conservatives just wailing on us on this, and they were, I think, right about rapid testing at the federal level, except that then their provincial colleagues didn't do a damn thing with the tests. And so the fact that we don't have schools or large congregate settings that need to stay open as far as employers or other settings, I mean, it makes no sense to me that we're a year later and we don't have a comprehensive rapid testing regime where people who have to go into work in particular areas aren't getting tested multiple times a week.
And we don't know what we're doing with schools. We don't know what we're doing with schools from one day to the next because of that, right?
And the smart people I trust, like Irfan Dalla is the chair, was a co-chair of a federal testing and screening task force. He happens to be a constituent, so I'm biased, but he's a brilliant guy. And he's really called for using testing as a screening tool. And look, it's not perfect. We know it's not going to replace the tests that take a longer period of time. Rapid testing, obviously, the accuracy isn't perfect, but you make up for that inaccuracy by doing it many times. And having a regime like that, I think, would have been really effective. And then the other thing is out of federal hands in some ways, but the contact tracing, it looks like the provinces in different parts of the province, at least, just straight up gave up on contact tracing. And that lack of basic
Ontario did.
Right. And that lack
Alberta didn't. I need to say that out loud because I shit all over most government sort of. Anyway, I don't need to get into that. But when there is something positive happening, I think it needs to be highlighted. I think we need to do more of that. And in Alberta, they did a very decent job of contact tracing. And I know they continue to work hard on that. So.
And some local public health units like Kingston did a great job too, right? So some public health units have been doing a better job than others, and it really comes down to resources. I remember pre-pandemic, not to be too partisan as far as it goes, but what were we cutting at the provincial level? We were cutting public health units because we saw them as regulatory red tape for restaurants instead of a public health response in a pandemic. Well, shit, that was a bad idea.
Yeah. Oh, everything that they've done here is a bad idea. Listen, and I'm not conservative nor am I liberal. I have the same disdain for general politics and party politics and identity politics. But what Doug Ford has done to this province while smiling, making cheesecakes, telling everybody it's okay is a fucking joke, Nate. And you know it because you live in this province and you're being nice because you're a federal employee, but it's bullshit. And you know it's bullshit. And in a quiet moment when you and I got to sit down and we'd say, okay, let's scrub all the bullshit aside. You've got your vape. I've got mine. Let's talk about this. What Doug Ford has done to this province is treat it like a fucking political playground And you could argue, according to conflicts of interest, a financial playground at a time when that is not what has been called for. That is not what has been called. What's been called for is your premier to go, I'm going to defer to people that actually have degrees in science and epidemiology and biology and pulmonologists and healthcare experts. That none of that has happened. Because if it had happened, we wouldn't be here. Like when someone says we're doing fine, like Fordsy did the other day, I call bullshit on it because the numbers are completely contrary and we're locked down again.
I think the challenge in some ways is you have different viewpoints and maybe it's born out of different ideologies, but you have a viewpoint from the provincial government that clearly at times has seen the economy and supporting the economy as an issue at odds with pandemic response. And
you mean lives? You mean lives, right?
And saving lives. And when I look to the public health experts that I trust, you're going to suffer economic consequences if you don't get the virus under control. So it's not a versus question. You need to do one to have the other. And I do think that's probably at bottom one of the real challenges we've seen to provincial pandemic response.
Yeah.
I remember a year ago when you were arguing for the Emergencies Act, because I remember writing about it and I remember agreeing with you. And I think a lot of people, the mathematics, isn't it that the more rapid you are with your response in a pandemic, the better it is for the economy? Because if you are able to tame that beast, like, within the first few months instead of within the first few years, then you're easily able to capture those second and third waves, and you're being vaccinated, and there's a way to handle it. But the exemptions for certain types of workers and the international flights and all of these lockdowns, but still you can go to Mexico. I don't understand why we're half-assing something where the experts seem to say that it's how rapid you are and how quickly you can lock down.
Yeah, there probably are ways at the same time of putting protocols in place to ensure certain activities are safe, right? So if you think of, the most base example where it is obviously safe, you look at the nature of the virus, and indoor activities are problematic, outdoor activities are far less problematic. And so here I am, registering my kid for T-ball the other day because we'll see how it goes. Maybe it doesn't happen, but outdoor activities are incredibly safe. And there's obviously a benefit to kids and to families being able to do these activities. So I do think it makes a lot of sense for policymakers to sit down and go, are there ways of making these activities safe? Are they safe in and of itself, in what we know about the virus, or are there ways we can make them safe based on what we know about the virus? But there are other activities, and travel is a good one, where, I think probably in fairness, some provinces, you mentioned Alberta, move faster for a pretty strong testing regime at their airport, but I think we could have had a much stronger testing regime early on. And
you're so nice to the provincial government. You are such a nice guy.
But at the federal level too, I think we could have. Yeah. I think we could have responded a little more strongly there. And now we've got a question where, okay, what do you do with people who are fully vaccinated? I get emails from folks coming back from Turks and Caicos fully vaccinated, and should they quarantine? And they're pissed off that they have to quarantine. And I go, I don't know, probably you shouldn't have, but that's the guidance. So out of my hands, I don't know.
Let me ask you a question, because you're touching on it, right? Let's pretend we're through this pandemic and it's 7 months from now, right? Things start opening up. Montana's, everybody can go there for some ribs and a steak. But hard you can't get in. Okay. Yeah, me too. Yeah. Sorry, you and I will go to Veggielicious because I know you're vegan and I know your wife's a vegan nutritionist. Yeah. And I respect it. I won't make fun of it because you have medical reasons for it. I'd make fun of it if you were like, "Hey, man, I just can't do it, bro."
I was a vegan for a month. It was the worst month of my life.
Yeah, well, a lot of poops.
Yeah, but okay, pause there just for a second to allow me to be a hippie.
So I want to get to vaccine passports because that's a big question, dude.
Okay, but go ahead. Before we get to vaccine passports, let's talk about preventing the next pandemic. And there are a number of reports of, you talk about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Well, there's an Intergovernmental Platform on Science and Biodiversity, UN Environment Program, International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, and they all go, the increased human demand for animal protein is the number one disease driver as it relates to pandemic risk. Number 2 is intensive agriculture. Number 3 is the commercial wildlife trade. And then climate change is part of it, the densification of our cities and the displacement of our ecosystems. But we have to transform our food system. So yeah, we can care about, fuzzy little bunnies, and we can care about sentient animals, and we can care about the fact that, on a moral view, we should treat animals with compassion and respect, but we should also maybe prevent the next pandemic.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And
I'm still going to eat something that bleeds tonight.
It's almost enough after this whole thing, like this whole pandemic, for me to go, yeah, I might take a swing at this vegan stuff, because I don't really feel like locking down in 20 years. Yeah. Vaccine passports, Nate. Nate Erskine Smith, he's Liberal MP for Beaches, East York. Can we have them? Because I want them. I don't feel comfortable, even if I am vaccinated, knowing the natures of variants of concern that a vaccine is going to prevent. We know you can get it twice. I've heard 6 to 8 months on the outset if you're vaccinated, according to variants of concern. That's pretty much all we know we're for sure covered for. And even that isn't for sure, according to certain studies. So the vaccine passports, to me, are really divisive, but they're only divisive if you don't believe in vaccines. So is there any chat of not just the G7 approach, but something domestic that the Liberal government is looking at, if indeed you are the party of favor at that time? Because I think there are a lot of people out there, the majority of people, smart people, want this vaccine, and there's some scared people who don't, and I get that. But then there's the other people that just don't believe in it because of God or Jesus or the mark of the beast or whatever the situation is that feeds into the wackiness, right? So where are we at with passports, and is it going to be a mandatory thing, and how do you even fucking do that?
I don't know yet. So I would say this is not a well-developed conversation, at least from what I've seen at the federal level. So, and it increasingly will need to be, because, as I say, we're going to get to a place by the summer where we're in much better shape than we are today. Where
it's going to be industry driven.
I already have heard businesses, folks in business start talking about this more than most, right? Because
a lot of restaurants are doing that Safe Seal thing, right? They're doing there's a ton of restaurant chains that have done it. But anyway, sorry, continue.
There's any number of travel we take already where you go get your shots before you travel to particular countries, right? I do think, and as it relates to, we went through this conversation in a different context as it related to privacy and the digital exposure notification app. And my view was, I don't know, maybe everyone should have it, given we're locking people in their homes right now. So I don't know, forcing me to have something on my phone is kind of a small inconvenience in comparison to civil liberties concerns around about all the restrictions on our travel. So if we think of it from a harm reduction lens, well, if we look at the really serious closures at the border that we have and the quarantine rules and everything else, well, maybe we look instead to have a vaccine passport that can actually open things up. Now, obviously, what you need to bring to bear in these conversations are equity considerations of, are there people coming to visit their family members or loved ones coming from countries that don't have access to vaccines? I spoke to Paul Farmer about vaccine equity, and he's talking about countries in Africa, including Rwanda, that have great public health systems, all things considered, that don't have access to vaccines. So we're all here worried about it in Canada. They really don't have access to vaccines. You know what I mean? So are we going to start putting rules in place that really prejudice countries that through no fault of their own haven't had access? So I think we have to work through some of those fairness considerations. But as a general,
I'm talking about the domestic approach, right? Like domestically, all of us here have different opinions. We all agree, though. We don't want to sit next to someone who refuses to get vaccinated while we're having fucking dinner, right? Of
course.
So where's that conversation at? Because the way I look at it is, this is going to be heavy lifting for you with the extremist communities, right? You're going to have a lot of people that aren't going to want to get vaccinated, and just out of spite, just because they're libertarians.
A lot. Should we be throwing a lot around?
I think it's like 20%. Last I had heard, 20%.
Wasn't it much higher previous to that?
No, you know why it is a little bit higher, and the reason why is because it's not just extremists. There are people that are going to get the vaccine and still find the passport really invasive. So it's really, there's a
I
lot
don't
of
get
those.
that.
And
Well, look,
you know,
there are the folks who are anti-vaxxers, but there are also I've heard the Civil Liberties Association raise concerns about vaccine passports too. So there are
In
people who
Canada,
are
civil liberties in Canada.
in Canada,
Can
exactly.
we
So
send them a note and tell them to shut the fuck up?
you are welcome. Yeah, it's a free country, but
I'm happy to.
I think they would. They
until we
believe
get the
in,
passports. Yeah.
if they don't believe in free speech, nobody does. But I would say the other thing just to keep in mind on this conversation is the the focus on herd immunity is also the idea is it's going to drive cases incredibly low. And while yes, it is. Well, we'll see what the immunity is like in terms of the extended period of time and what boosters will need. So I think we are early on in this conversation around what a vaccine kind of passport it is going to look like.
I don't think we're early enough.
Yet, federally.
Well, and see, that's the thing is that I don't think we're early enough in talking about it because of all the drivers behind it, right? Like you're going to have to deal with the evangelical community. You're going to have to deal with other religions. Freedom of religion isn't so free anymore when you're held hostage by it as a country, by the way. I just want to point that out. But,
easy, Dean. Easy.
No, I'm happy to say it. But like when we're talking about the greater good, right? Shouldn't some people are going to get upset with me? Shouldn't people either be forced to get the vaccine or not contribute to society in a meaningful way? I'm not talking about people who can't have it. I'm not talking about people who medically, like my friend's mom was turned away because she had an allergic reaction to something that was in one of the serums when she was filling out her stuff for a vaccine. So she wasn't allowed to get it. And I get that. And I know there are going to be people that always exceptions to the rule. But I don't find freedom of religion to be an exception to the rule where the greater good is concerned.
We already in schools, as an example, where we require vaccinations as a general principle, people can opt out of obtaining those vaccinations and still send their kids to school, right? So I remember I was conflicted at one point. A constituent was coming to me. It was just for me to notarize the document, so just to prove that it was her. But I was a bit conflicted. I was like, I don't really want to participate in a process where you're opting out of vaccines and sending your kids to school. So you got to find a different notary. But I defer to public health experts in some ways here, right? Like who am I with the knowledge that I have to say, here's exactly how we should design the rules. So what keeps us safest? And are there ways where we can allow people to exercise their objections for whatever the reasons that they might be without putting us at risk? And if we can't, then yeah, let's not put ourselves at risk. And the collective will rules, and that's the way it goes. But if we can allow for objections and keep ourselves safe, then I think that would be the fair balance. But I don't know what the answer is on that front, and I would lean to the collective safety more than anything.
Do you think though that one of the main reasons behind that is the communications though? Because I think that a lot of us since the beginning have been seeing what we've been calling a communications kind of failure on all levels of government. Hindsight not even being what it is at the time, being told things that turned out not to be true, just weeks later, but said with such, convincing, because I guess the strategy being you don't want to cause panic, but the internet's forever. And now we're seeing, in hindsight, and it's been a botched kind of endeavor by the government, by not just the federal government, but the provincial government, even municipal governments, because it's kind of a trickle down thing. And, how much of that does that play a role in things like vaccine worry and, not full on anti-vaxxers, but people who are just like second guessing vaccines because the communications has been so bad?
Well, we see with AstraZeneca as the example, and we'll see how this plays out with Johnson & Johnson, but certainly I had any number of conversations with constituents who preferred to get Pfizer and prefer to get Moderna, and AstraZeneca, specifically in relation to the blood clot issue, that it just created an additional hesitancy where lots of those folks still got it, but they were a little bit, maybe. And I think the answer really is when you look at the way out of this crisis. In some public health measures now, until we have sufficient supply and we're able to roll it out in a fast enough way, continue to matter. But the way out of this crisis in the end is mass vaccination. And so to get there, AstraZeneca still is, and Johnson & Johnson still is, less effective in some respects, but still very effective, 100% effective at reducing severe outcomes and death. Well, let's make sure everyone we use that supply to make sure everyone gets it. I think that has to continue to be the message. The challenging thing in some measures here is we don't have a situation where it's being the public health experts at the microphone. It's often being the prime minister or often being the premier, and that probably has caused the messaging in some ways to suffer versus having someone where there is greater independence, and we know that it's a matter of science coming at us.
Why can't we get facts? Why can't we get facts like that? Like you bring up a great point, Nate, and I think that's a general frustration among all Canadians is that we don't get facts. Like we get spin by and large, right? Why haven't public health officials with degrees in biology and people who are like board certified professionals that understand the objective truth about everything that's going on?
They're not fighting for the podium, Dean. They're not.
Well,
the politicians are.
But they can't, because like the other day, Dr. Michael Warner's done yeoman's work. He's watched.
Yeah. He's at Michael Guerin here in the East End.
Yeah. Brilliant guy. He was tubed by Doug Ford and his crew several months ago because he was going, hey guys, this is fucking serious. We got to do something about it. And they didn't like it. So why are we not getting that unvarnished truth by guys like him?
Well, one good thing about the media environment in which we live is that we are getting Warner able to deliver his message in different ways. We are getting Dr. Fissman able to deliver his message in different ways. It would be nice if, and at the federal level, in fairness, we have seen Tam and her team at the microphone answering questions from the media.
That's true. Yeah.
Answering questions with candor. So, and she hasn't gotten everything right. There was a situation, if we remember very early on, James mentions the internet's forever, that the advice was different on masks, and then it changed. And
all the psychos,
I didn't even know about that.
Right?
What are you talking
about? All the crazies use it.
But then again, the public health experts I listen to, they say, yeah, look, the evidence was a bit conflicting. And then as soon as it's a good thing in science when people change their minds according to the evidence. That should make you trust in the science, not distrust in it, right? So
Dr. Hinshaw in Alberta has been stepping up to the mic before a politician here in Alberta, so that's much appreciated.
Yeah,
well, let's be honest, you couldn't find Jason Kennedy for
we also have to, put the context into place, because there was a lot of things said that people at the time were saying, well, this clearly isn't true. Like, she didn't know if closing, and it was the health minister who said that she didn't know if she said that closing the border could sometimes cause more or a higher infection rate, things like that. And we didn't want to ban flights coming in from China at the time. And then we did like weeks later when it seemed too late. And so those are the things. And at the time when people were saying, I think we should ban flights from China, we were being called racist, mostly by the NDP.
No, but that's actually, I would compare that very similarly to the CanSino deal, where people go, oh, you should have done this, and I can't believe you put all your eggs in that one basket. And I would say that the real answer is most of the cases we saw, no one was calling for us to close the border with the U.S. And those are the cases we saw, right? So the virus was coming to Canada no matter what, unless we closed all borders, and we weren't closing the U.S. border. No expert, no citizen, no opposition politician was calling for that to happen. So it's a bit of a, red herring in some ways to say, oh, you closed the border to China late. In the same way, I think the CanSino deal is a bit of a red herring, although it gets held up certainly as a big club to hit us with.
No, I think flights from China is what I was saying, but the closing the border was the U.S. border at the time. That was like April of 2020. We were saying, why isn't the border closed? It was probably earlier than that, maybe even March. And that's when she said, well, we don't see how that could cause lowering infection. Oftentimes it makes it worse. And we're just, how does it make it worse? And there's just a couple of things. Look, it's a fluid situation. I get it.
It's tough, and you got to figure it's tough too. Like on the one hand, we're asking for the public health officials to be at the mic first and to be given the reins, and we also then have to accept that when some things are going to change and their collective body of evidence is going to change. And
and they're not politicians. So, and they're
exactly.
probably sitting there trying to make a decision on how to answer a question based on the people standing behind them that are politicians. And
no one's getting this perfect too, right? Like think about how new this is. This is the first pandemic we've had in a fucking 100 years. A lot has changed in 100 years. So we're trying to figure this whole thing out. And I think there's been a massive allowance for that. I think by and large, that's what I use to remind myself anytime something doesn't go my way. Like the other day when I showed up, applied to get my shot, got confirmed to get my shot. When I got there, they told me the postal code list changed overnight and I was no longer welcome to get my shot. And they told me I had to leave. Like, I didn't freak out because I get it. Like those people aren't there. I was furious, but I tried not to be. It's not their fault. Like, and I know stuff changes. There changes all the time. But what is encouraging to me anyway is that someone like you is willing to spend an hour, 13 minutes, and 55 seconds on the phone with three yokels like us saying, hey, listen, sure we do this and sure we have a profile, but to get answers for people that listen to this program as far as what's next and are you going to be okay? You've been terrific at laying it out. And we don't have that. We never have anybody criticize their own party. We never have anybody say, hey, listen, and not for the sake of criticizing them to be an asshole, but just based on the merit of the situation. And so the fact that you're willing to sit here and do this with us is a big, big deal because it makes some sense to us, right? You're able to talk a couple of people down. You're able to get us information. We're able to share this information with other people. But you're the only guy doing it, dude. Unless
hold on, we had Randy. We had
Randy Hillier. Yeah, we had, but he doesn't. Yeah, I guess he counts, right?
But it goes back to that question about trust. Are you gonna trust someone who says they always get it right? I haven't got it right every single time that I've opened my mouth. I've not gotten every decision I've made in life right. So I think we got to recognize that governments are made up of human beings. We're doing our best, and I think in the course of this pandemic, at the federal level at least, and I would emphasize the response for individuals and businesses. I think we got a lot right, and frankly, for the first time, maybe not unfair to say first time, but really there was a sense in the spring that when programs were being rolled out, they were then fixing the programs real quick because they were hearing feedback from businesses, hearing feedback from us. That doesn't always happen. And I think that kind of experience where we say things aren't going to be perfect, we're going to work together to improve them, and we're going to do our best, that builds trust and being able to self-reflect and say, yeah, we could have maybe done a bit better here and done a bit better there. If we want people to trust in us and then put their trust in us so we get to keep doing this, for me at least, being a bit more forthright about where we do step in the wrong direction is better overall.
Real quick, $6 billion to Air Canada today. Just wanted to pick your brain about that because that seems egregious. Maybe you could explain that to me.
Well, rates will probably go down though.
Well, and the peanuts will be better.
Every country does it though. It's every country props up their airliner. Like everyone does. Yeah.
I know.
So
I don't know why.
I haven't gone into the nuts and bolts of this entirely yet because it was a fairly recent announcement, and one can fairly say, $6 billion. Here's some other priorities. Where's the money for that? I saw someone tweeting out, where's the money for Laurentian University as an example. But when I look at that, at least the broad strokes of the deal, the fact that there's $500 million in equity, which means we're going to have a seat at the table, which means that there's going to be much greater accountability in the end for this government money. I think that's a good thing. When it comes to requiring refunds, I think that's a good thing. When it comes to requiring that they continue regional routes, it's not going to impact me in Toronto, but I know it matters a great deal. It's a necessary element of our transportation infrastructure for many in this country. And the rest is loans that are repayable. Now, if we wake up 10 years from now and some of those loans have been forgiven and it's been taxpayer dollars down the drain, then lots of room for criticism. In the same way there ought to be criticism when we saw the auto sector bailout in the financial crisis where we didn't get all that money back. But I think on paper, if we get the money back as it relates to the loans, not all of which are secured, so maybe there's some reason for debate and concern, but if we get the money back on the loans and the equity allows us to hold the companies better accountable and the conditions are honored, I saw that, I was like, that's not as bad as I thought.
Did you really $6 billion? Well, how do you explain it to your constituents who bring it up? Like, what do you say to a guy who loses his house and his job, and he's got no money and he can't get CERB, and the CERB he did get before he's got to pay back? And how do you explain that to those people?
By way of jobs, fundamentally. I mean, this is a company, but it employs many Canadians. And for the same reason we've delivered income supports, for the same reason we've delivered business supports, there are certain sectors where those business supports have not been able to keep up because they have been so decimated. So whether it's in the art sector, like festivals, I have a jazz festival. Jazz festival can't happen. So how are we going to support those artists? How are we going to support those industries? And air sector clearly is one. It's going to be one of the last to come back because of the nature of that close proximity travel and the trust we don't have in being together and flying together until maybe we have the passports you're talking about. So I do think that.
So we are getting passports.
Well, you know, I don't know. Maybe you got to run for health minister, but I would say you got to look at it through the lens of, you know, economic supports and how do we make sure we aren't losing a significant sector of the economy. But it does come down to jobs. Like how is this going to impact us if we let it go? And I think that stepping in to save certain sectors makes a lot of sense, especially when they're as strategic as the air sector.
We all knew it was coming.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you said nice stuff there, Nate. You did.
But that's not even my file as far as it goes. But my main concern was refunds, right? When you see, I come at it from a lens of consumer protection oftentimes. So I was really frustrated when with what Facebook did with privacy and Cambridge Analytica. I thought it was atrocious. Here we are as individual consumers. How are we going to read every term and condition? No, there have to be rules to protect us. When it comes to telcos, they should be held accountable because they're not giving us a fair deal as consumers. And similarly, when it comes to the air sector, we should make sure that Canadians are made whole, that before any bailout happens, we should make sure Canadians are made whole as individual consumers, and that's going to happen. So maybe there was a better way of doing it. It's not a file that I'm particularly seized with as it relates to the air sector, but overall, it looked pretty defensible on a first cut, but I haven't gotten the details.
What are the chances you could get rid of the CRTC? Good?
Poor, but it is interesting. You know, in law school, you learn that big policy decisions shouldn't be made by judges in some ways.
I do the same thing.
Well, you think of a court, right? Well, a court is an adversarial model, but it's very case specific. So you don't have this breadth of policy expertise, and you learn that this adversarial model is not well designed for big policy decisions. And then we created the CRTC, which is effectively just that. So we'll see where the CRTC lands on MVNOs. We'll see where the CRTC pushes, hopefully, the telcos to do the right thing. We'll see where the Competition Bureau lands on Sean Rogers, but there's a classic area where we're a country of oligopolies, and we need to better protect consumers.
Because I have an idea for a bill I wanted to run by you.
Yeah, okay.
A minute?
Sure.
Nate Erskine Smith, Liberal MP, Member of Parliament, big time federal guy right here. Okay.
So here's that. Entirely not. I mean, some of that's true. I'm a Liberal MP, but the rest of it is not true.
You're big time. Dude, you're the most big time politician we've had on the show. It's great. And you actually give a shit, so it's even better.
Yes, we had Randy. You keep forgetting Randy.
Yeah. Dude, only 12 times in that podcast did he stop and go, boy, I could use a beer. Anyway, so here's a bill idea.
Nate's thinking the same thing, though.
Do you know how Trudeau gave big media a whole bunch of money? Bell, Rogers, all the big swinging.
It was through the wage subsidy, but
yeah, and then they fired a whole bunch of people and kept the money.
I remember.
You remember that when Bell did that? That was fun, right?
Bell don't do that, Bill.
So then there's the newspaper, print, broadcaster, government subsidies in the tune. I think it's to the tune of about $350 million, if I'm not mistaken. Last year, am I in the ballpark? Does that sound about right?
It could be it.
Might be. So here's my idea for a bill, and take it seriously because I think it's a good idea. Deregulate the airwaves here in this beautiful country of ours, so that radio stations and broadcasters can compete with the content online. Obviously, deregulation to the point where you can say and do anything you want is different, not hate speech, not that stuff. But turn your attention away from words like fuck, shit, balls, dick, like that kind of stuff. Turn your attention away from that one too, the morality portion of it, and allow people to be able to deliver content like they can get online, which is killing traditional media. And I think you've got a whole bunch of money that you don't have to hand out to mainstream media next year. I think you got $350 million you can keep, because what people are going to do is go, oh, Renaissance time. I love this idea. I can go and listen to a morning show, and they're actually allowed to talk about things that mean something. They're actually allowed to deliver great content that they can get online, which is eating their lunch. My idea, I think, is not only a good one, but the only way you can do it is if you let me fire everybody on the CRTC.
Well, there are a couple of things I would say. What problem are we trying to solve with the bailouts and with the support that we're bringing to bear, right? So as it relates to the newspapers, for me at least, I think it's a problem of civic journalism, that I think I think there is room for public support, because when you see, and it's not just Facebook and Google, it's and online that is eating their lunch per se. It is the fact that Craigslist and online classifieds took away a huge portion of the revenue there too a number of years ago. So this has been an industry in decline for some time now. You get your money from one of three sources, right? You get it from either, well, four sources potentially, I suppose. You get it from ads, you get it from subscriptions, or you get it from benefactors. So one, public benefactors or private benefactors. And in the case of civic journalism, we do have a fund that is quite small of the total fund that you might have been referencing, which is the Local Journalism Initiative. And that's actually really good. So when that is funding, so I've got a local paper here, the Beach Metro News in the East End, they were able to get a reporter, and they were able to then do more civic journalism. And it is specific to a particular public good that we want, as opposed to just sort of a tax credit for a whole bunch of employees potentially that aren't necessarily providing that public good that we want. So the other aspect of it that is a challenge, I think, so it may be the case that online content is eating the lunch of traditional media for the reason of the kind of content that they're able to produce. I think the other real, just reality to it is the on-demand nature of, so the owner of Indie 88 is a constituent, and his challenge is competing with Spotify. Yeah, competing with on-demand music is really hard to do. So there are just basic structural challenges to the on-demand environment that is going to be really hard for traditional media to keep up with.
Does my go-to getting rid of the CRTC? Then is that a big no? We're not doing the bill, Nate?
I would have no qualms with serious reform of the CRTC. They are also in the business. They have spent more time. This is the thing that galls me, They've spent more time on skinny cable packages than affordability of wireless services for Canadians. I think that's absolutely galling. An essential service for Canadians, access to the internet, and we've spent less attention and less time than cable packages that are going to be extinct in a number of years.
Where I live right now, just by being on this podcast, it's probably going to cost me like $30. I'm not kidding, because there's no unlimited internet. I have to use a hub, which means I'm going through the cell tower. By the time once you get over, like, I think it's 125 gigs, it's something like 30 cents a megabyte or something like that. It's something ridiculous. And it's a huge problem. And I was wondering two things. I don't know if you're gonna have time to answer both, but the Local Journalism Initiative, I think you should have something in there that promotes 2 outlets per small area. And the reason why is because one of the most kind of widespread diseases in local journalism right now is that they only have one outlet in small communities. So like Barry's Bay, for example, for years they only had one outlet. And this is why I know this, because I work for a competitor that sprang up 4 years ago or so. And what was happening, we've done the research, and it happens all over the place, is that one media outlet gets the majority of their ad revenue from the local township. And therefore, they don't report about anything that might be happening at the local governmental levels, corruption, whatever, conflicts of interest, because they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. And I think that if you're going to do a local journalism initiative, you should keep that in mind, because otherwise you're still not going to have good journalism. It's just going to be, you might have jobs, but not good journalism. And
it's a good point on gatekeepers of that fund too, that you want to make sure that whoever is in charge of doling out those dollars is arm's length in a serious way from government, but also that they're taking into account the need to, whether you're hyper focused on it needs to be 2 in every community, or you're just focused on diversity and competition, and also a diversity of voices by way of people's backgrounds, and making sure that the online digital ecosystem is as supported as sort of your traditional print media. I think all of those factors need to be brought to bear. But you make a good point, where if there's a single media outlet and they are making decisions, unfortunate decisions, obviously, if they're not wanting to hold elected officials like me accountable, then that should be factored into the analysis too.
And do you guys ever discuss Elon Musk's project? Because doesn't that sort of do an end around?
We heard about it at the industry committee.
Skylink?
Yeah, it's expensive. It's a number of years off, and right now there's a lot of potential to it, no doubt. It looks like in the short term, it is going to be principally focused on providing internet to places where there isn't internet, but it's not going to be a competitive option where we are already serviced. And this is a thing that people have to keep in mind. The biggest digital divide that exists in our country, and rural Canada needs to be connected unquestionably, but the biggest digital divide that exists is on income. So in my community, there are people without access to internet or access to wireless services because of price and because they don't have enough money to get by, and including affording that basic necessity. So that needs to be addressed in a serious way.
Nate Erskine Smith, MP for Beaches East York, very kind of you, Liberal MP for Beaches East York. I put the Liberal in there not to be a jerk. I'm just identifying the fact that you're Liberal.
Sounds like it, though.
Sorry, no, I wasn't being a jerk. I don't think I was being a jerk.
That's all right. That's all right.
Last question for me. James was your constituent. Was he at your house? Was he that guy that comes to your house with like a picture of a pothole on the street, and he's like, Nate.
I want to get this tree out of my yard.
I thankfully don't have to deal with potholes at the federal level, but I will say,
that doesn't mean I don't think Jamesy's been at your house asking you to, allow him to cut down an oak tree or something.
I actually worked for a while on the campaign of the guy that one of the people that ran against you when you were running to be candidate, if you recall.
Jeff?
Tom.
Oh, Tom. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Tom's great.
Yeah. Tom's a good guy. But I was going to ask you also before you go, and come on, and then I know the reaction is going to be like I'm trying to stir the pot, and I'm really not. Have you had more time to think about J.K. Rowling? And I only asked that because because
this gets to Dean's point. It's like, who's got time for that shit? It's a pandemic.
I got no time for J.K.
I think. Look. You know what? I don't care about anything else. Listen. She's the most threatened and abused person, woman for sure, on the internet. She's the most ones that receives the most death threats. She's the most abused.
Why do you care?
Because he looks like the house elf.
You do. Look
Why
like
wouldn't
Dobby.
I care?
You look a little like Dobby.
He looks like Dobby.
You look like.
Go ahead.
Here we go.
Anderson Cooper's stand-in.
The problem with an issue like that, though, James, you ask me questions. I try to go down that. It's such a rabbit hole of you got to read.
You know why it's a rabbit hole? Because no one wants to talk about it.
James, he's doing the right thing. He's staying out of it.
No,
get to the bottom
that's the
of
wrong
it.
thing. That's why we're here.
The thing is so some of her comments I've read and I go, okay. And then other comments, I'm like, okay, well, what's the full context? And there's too much reading that one has to do. When then there are like very sensible voices. Like, I don't have time to read all that J.K. Rowling said and know.
Dude, he doesn't care.
I know he doesn't. I get it.
So let him not care. Not everybody.
Why do you have to ruin all of our
Do you know how
days?
many podcasts we've done where you've come on with a guest and you're like, okay, quick question, J.K. Rowling, good or bad?
None.
You'd be the worst dinner date ever.
You're the only person ever asked me about it.
Well, that's because I'm more interesting than most of the reporters that give you the boilerplate questions. That's all.
But the one thing I would say, though, the business of government does have to continue. So, Dean, to your point, yes, of course, we have to be consumed by pandemic response and we have to get it right. And that has to be primary focus. But at the same time, once programs are in place, once we have virtual parliament stood up, we can start addressing some other things. I think it's a good thing that we have other bills before parliament that we are addressing drug policy reform as an example, that we're setting down targets for climate action and increasing meaningful climate action. We're going to have a budget coming up, and the budget coming up is not going to be only focused on pandemic response because the business of government continues. And frankly, there are lessons to be learned out of this crisis that aren't just health in the sense of pandemic response, that when we think of the social determinants of health, we think of income as the primary social determinant of health overall. And we know that people who are living in poverty have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Well, there's a lesson learned. We should act on it. We should strengthen our social safety net. It's not exactly pandemic response, but it's something a lesson we should learn from this and double down on. Childcare is another one where I expect significant childcare investments in this coming budget based on everything we've heard. And people have been at home. They recognize it's really hard to do one's job with kids running around. I got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. It's hard. So we need more childcare, unquestionably. That's a lesson learned from the pandemic. It's not pandemic response exactly. So the business of government is going to continue in addition to pandemic response. The main thing is it can't distract us from pandemic response. That does have to be priority number one, but I hope we can do other things at the same time.
We'll see.
I hate politicians a little bit less now that I've met you, Nate.
I've made some small difference. It's funny. I'll close with this. You said earlier you protest vote. I remember knocking on doors in the last election, and people would go, we like you, but not happy with blah blah blah. So we were going to protest vote and vote green. I'm like, I'm the protest vote.
See, now listen, if I lived in your constituency and didn't talk to you like this, I probably wouldn't vote for you. But now if I lived in your constituency, not only would I vote for you, I'd be like, hey, everybody, come with me and Nate Erskine Smith, and let's go make a difference and try and figure it out and tell people the truth, because it's not common. This conversation doesn't happen with other politicians, and
it's very appreciative, Nate.
Yeah,
This was amazing. You were fantastic.
Yeah.
Sorry about James.
And I can't wait to get together
Rowling.
with
Sorry about the guy that set the whole thing up. Fuck that
Can
guy.
I read my Kid Harry Potter? That's all I want to know. Can I read my Kid Harry Potter? I have no idea.
Yeah.
Apparently, if you do, you're transphobic, but no one wants to hear it. So.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Nate Erskine Smith, thanks, dude. Really appreciate you being here. He is the Liberal MP for Beaches, East York. Good dude, Jamesy. Good get.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
He's normal.
You pissy with us about the J.K. Rowling stuff?
I just think you guys stepped on it a little bit. That's all. Fucking.
It wasn't on the agenda. Like, I didn't
Doesn't
know you
matter.
were going to ask me about.
I say what's on the motherfucking agenda when it's my turn to talk. Just like you guys say, what's on the agenda. It's a legit question. Who cares? Fuck that.
Well, no, it had nothing to do with the conversation, so it was sort of shocking. But
it was the end. It was the end.
All
Like
right.
$6 billion from here, Canada. I guess.
Jamesy, Locke, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that I appreciated his reasonable sort of approach to things, right? He wasn't dismissive, even though you could tell he might have had a more. Some politicians will just go, you know what? That's not. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to move on to the next thing, and I can work my way into what I want you to talk about with just a few sentences. He didn't do that. He addressed everything.
He's not stained with that veneer of media training. You know what I mean?
Yeah, great point.
But
he doesn't have any of that.
One of the cleanest guests we've had on.
Really good speaker. So you add those things, right?
Like clean from the perspective of you can have a a good conversation with him. His points made sense, he moved.
And I don't even think he really likes me at all, which is the funny part. I think because
how can you not like
because
you?
I'm very critical against his government. I'm a big booster for him, but I hit, like, I asked him first. I asked him once before about the J.K. Rowling thing in the middle of his Facebook Live thing that he does once a week. I was like, I don't remember how I worded the question, but it was like, what are your thoughts on J.K. Rowling?
I like
do you
how
think she's transphobic or something? And he was like reading the questions, and he's like,
he dismissed you right away. He was like,
no, he was like, no. At the time, he said, and this is why I wanted to ask him, because at the time he said, I don't really know much about it, but most certainly she's wrong. So I was like, oh, okay. So
today was
perfect.
Today was a more involved answer. Yeah, today was an involved answer.
Yeah,
today was. Who the fuck cares? No one fucking
today was a more involved answer. You're the only one who asks me about this.
So what?
And
I think it's important.
And over again when we're talking about completely different things. I love it.
It used to be important to know why the world's most abused woman online was being abused. That seems important, except if it's a trans issue, then we're not allowed to talk about it.
Listen,
but if it was like race,
if we're going to say the most abused, I'm putting Malala, who got shot in
Easily.
the face for going to school, up there before I put J.K.
I'm talking
Rowling.
about online. Did she get shot by her computer? Because I'm talking about when you're online, like on Twitter, on social media. She is certainly the most threatened and the most abused person in the world.
Who cares?
Exactly.
I don't care if she's I don't.
A billionaire.
That's because you don't have a soul.
That's untrue.
You should care. Why don't you care?
Because
a woman, the most victimized woman online in the world, and you're just like, meh.
Yeah, because it doesn't affect my day. If someone said to J.K. Rowling, "You're the worst person in the world," I have no emotional reaction to going to help her and her reputation.
Why would you have an emotional reaction to anybody? Why would you have an emotional reaction to anybody being threatened and abused online?
Well, if let's say it was a little kid like my buddy Xavier.
So a child,
kid with autism who gets bullied, and I took that seriously, so I helped him out.
You can walk and chew gum, and you can say, I feel bad for that kid with autism.
No, because I don't care about J.K. Rowling and her well-being. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care if people think she hates transgendered folks.
I'm in Dean's canoe.
That's because you guys don't really care about people. Well, I don't know.
That's a lie.
Still in Dean's canoe.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. It's tipping though. It's taking on some water, guys. I think a little bit. It is a big issue, and people, you try to talk about it with people that don't want to talk about it at all, and they make you think that it's all you want to talk about. But you're like, but we never talk about it because you never want to talk about it, and it becomes the issue where it's taboo to talk about, and that's why he didn't want to talk about it because it was a rabbit hole, and the only way to get out of the rabbit hole is to talk your way out of the rabbit hole. You can't just like be afraid of it
or ignore the rabbit hole.
No, because then everyone else that wants to talk about it tumbles down the rabbit hole because of apathy.
Well, that's up to them, dude. If you want to go and fucking read a whole bunch of shit about how much J.K. Rowling hates the LGBT community, or thinks you're not a girl, you can have your period.
Do you remember when Jonathan Kay was on?
I don't care to talk about whether she is or she isn't.
I know. Forget about that for a second, because the pivot would have been into the underlying issue. It's not really about the abuse. It's why is she being abused?
James, who cares? I don't care.
But Jonathan Kay, when he was on, talked about the issue that was the underpinning of the J.K. Rowling issue, and you were very interested when we were talking about the issue. Right. So I want to I don't want to sit there and talk about J.K. Rowling forever. I want to talk about the issue that makes people not want to talk about J.K. Rowling, which is the same issue that you've talked about with Jonathan Kay, and you did a very good job talking about it. So just because I used her as the pivot point doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. That's all. That makes sense.
I have numerous reasons in my life to drink. You just fucking added another one.
Good. Why don't you fucking do a line of coke off your wife's ass and call us and let us know how it went?
See, look at you getting all negatively emotional. You don't need to do this. We've talked about it.
I think having a line off of a woman's ass is really
You're all upset because we don't want to talk about J.K. Rowling.
I got this whole list of reasons to drink, right? You're on it now. You're on it. I didn't need another thing. This J.K. Rowling, because I don't understand it, and you and your obsession with this, all of a sudden, I'm gonna go get water.
The obsession. You sound like my girlfriend. Why do you always do this? And why do you
have a girlfriend? I thought you had a wife.
I'm not really married to her, but I've been with her for 12 years, so I call her my wife. I call her my wife, but it's not what you think. It's just that I resent her.
I feel like we should stop now.
Oh, fuck off. Don't. You guys are trying to make a bit out of this shit. Come on, man.
No, it's just a minute.
It's impossible.
We've been here
for
an
us
hour
to make
40
more out of this than you already have.
Okay. I feel like I'm being pig roasted right now, to be honest with you. So go ahead.
That's because you're too sensitive.
Yeah, you are very
would you
sensitive.
fucking guys just like stop?
The first
like
thing you said, okay, listen, you're the one who keeps bringing up.
Combined 500 pounds is coming at little old me.
Everybody,
right?
stop. Like, you just talked about something. All of us said we don't really care about it, and then you got angry at us for not caring.
About it.
Yeah.
So you guys
I don't know.
Crying
I think
I don't know.
Okay, here's the thing. Can I just say something quickly?
No,
please.
James, the first thing that you said after we finished with Nate, and it was an awesome interview, was that you don't even think he likes you.
I know. What? So what? What's wrong with that? I was being honest. I think if you put a gun to his head and be like, yeah, I'm not really sure about the guy. I don't know. Fuck. Like, I think
I get that. I understand that. But it's interesting to me that now we're having this conversation because for the next day before we get back on the air again, we're going to be dealing with you on DMs about how much we don't like you or whether or not we don't like you. Yep. You've got some issues in that regard. And I've said this before. Listen, I am not a paid fucking therapist at all, but you should come to fucking Edmonton and spend a week with me. I could fix you. You got to stop giving a shit about what fucking people think of you.
Yeah.
You really, really do.
100%.
It is. I think you think it's women or somebody told you it's like mom was mean to you or girls were mean to you. It's
his therapist
said
told
whatever.
Him that.
It's not that.
She's probably right.
You care too much about what people think of you. Stop it. The sooner you stop it, the better off you're going to be as a human being. It'll fix all of your fucking problems. Dr. Locke, by the way, thank you. Thank you.
Makes me happy.
Dean, I'm not fucking wrong.
Great show.
Am I fucking not wrong? I am not wrong.
Oh, would you just fucking relax? I'm fine now. Okay,
I think you need to take yourself
please
a
stop
little
fucking
less
psychoanalyzing
seriously.
me. Both of you guys. Just stop it.
You force it on us.
I don't. I'm trying to get you to stop for 5
like prison girl.
You 5 minutes,
on
you guys.
us like
Every time I talk,
girl.
you guys are like doing that anger management scene with fucking what's his face, and you're like, "Sir, you better calm down." I'm like, "I'm actually pretty calm. I just like the issue." James, you're really fucking angry. I think I'm okay. You just keep on bringing it.
No one called you angry. No one called you angry.
Whatever.
He just said you need to stop giving a fuck so much about what other people think about you.
Oh, then I'll stop caring about what you're saying.
No. You don't have to stop caring. You have to stop worrying about what other people are thinking
I'm
about
not
you.
worried.
We are far more concerned about what we think of ourselves than what we're thinking of you. At the end of this podcast, no one sits. Well, actually, that's wrong. I'll be pissed off at you for about an hour or two after this one, but. Honestly, we're all in our own heads about what we said and what we didn't say. I'll be reliving a question that I asked. Like, why did I ask the question about whether or not I can get a 6-pack at a 7-Eleven in the middle of the fucking conversation about COVID?
Because you don't do enough sit-ups at the 7-Eleven.
Well, anyway, do you know what I'm saying? We're all hyper-focused on
6-pack.
ourselves. We're not thinking about James and James. You know what I'm saying? You're more worried about James than everybody else is. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn.
Okay, fuck's sakes. Okay, listen to me for 1 second, okay? Relax. Everyone relax.
We have
and just listen.
This is
because I think what you'll find is that I like what you just said was unnecessary because your premise wasn't real and then you built upon that premise. So let me just back it up for a second. Good conversation recall, okay? So this is exactly what happened. I thought it was a reasonable J.K. Rowling question. I'm sort of half giddy about it. We get off the air. I think it's a joke when I'm like, I don't think he really likes it that much. I thought you guys would laugh and then you'd pivot to something else and then the sponsors would come in and that'd be done with it. But you guys built this thing like it was this big thing. And that got me more frustrated. So my increase in frustration made you feel like you were right about the premise, but you weren't. And now here we are. 10 minutes later, listening to you guys tell me that you'll be mad for an hour after we get up there because I care about people think about it so much. Like, that's not what's happening. It's not.
That's like literally what just happened again, actually.
Yeah, but no.
Yeah, it is. Block is 100%.
Like you poke a bear and you're like, and I'm like getting poked, and you're like, what's the matter? Why are you so upset? I'm like,
suck it up. When someone says something to me that's constructive, even though the tone is shit, I'm like, maybe I am being.
The premise was that I was mad or concerned about what people think when I was trying to say a joke. I was trying to say a joke. I was literally trying to make a laugh.
All right.
Which part was I?
All right. You tried to say a joke. I get it.
Yes, the joke was, I don't even think he likes me that much. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. And instead, you guys were like, oh, I think we need to peer into this.
I used
Not really.
that
No,
statement to reinforce a point I was making about your overall.
I just don't like being, I guess maybe what it is you caught this. I don't like being misunderstood. And I thought the point was that I thought the trans issue was an interesting thing. And I guess it was out of left field, and I'll take that as a constructive criticism, but it's not an issue.
I'm not criticizing you, but I will say this to wrap everything up. I know that you love J.K. Rowling. I know you have a serious issue with her being harangued as homophobic or LGBTQ-phobic or whatever they're calling it now.
Because it comes from the left. That's what I don't like about it.
Yeah, I know. But that's a you thing. That's what we're saying. That's a
lot of
you
people
thing. Oh. Well, yes, it is, but not.
Talk with Locke. I don't have to agree with that, but he still does it, right?
Are you
trans talk with James? I think it's.
Can I finish what I'm saying?
We're being.
Or are you
honest.
just going to keep? You're just going to keep bubbling. Let me finish.
You're attacking your co-host, but go ahead.
No, I'm just telling the truth. I know I haven't raised my voice once. I've been pretty calm because
I haven't. I was yelling.
Yeah, I know, but
this is really comfortable. Thanks, guys, for this. Go ahead.
No, I love it. This is what we should be doing. We should be helping each other become better people.
It's your turn next week, and we'll just dismantle your psychology piece by piece, so that
that'd be
can
fun.
be like,
and then we can do me.
Go ahead. Yeah, that'd be fun.
My
point is this: you took it personally. The fact that we didn't care to have a J.K. Rowling question come out of left field at the end of a really serious, fun, heartfelt political interview, and then you said, and I thought it was kind of funny, actually. I didn't have a problem with it. I was just like, wow, here we go with the J.K. Because in a lot of different interviews that we've been doing, you'll bring up J.K. Rowling, and it has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about. It just kind of appears. So
you know why?
I kind of think that we should.
Yes, go
for
ahead.
A reason, but I kind of think that we should continue this. I really do. I think the next interview at some point in time, you need to ask the person about J.K. Rowling. Maxime Bernier is on the program on Monday. Thanks to you once again. You're a great guy. We'll ask him about J.K. Rowling.
You're doing a great job on getting the guests.
Really
James.
great.
You really are.
Really great.
Fucking, it's amazing.
But you could take yourself just a smidge left seriously. Just a smidge.
You're right, guys. I'm
We
going to
like
take
you.
a long look into
We love
the
you.
mirror.
We do. We like
When
you.
have I let you
Fix
down?
these issues.
You're
When
just
have I let you
really,
down?
you're just really
Just
annoying
now,
at times.
just the last 10 minutes. That's the
You
only
took it
time you've let
personally
me
because
down.
you're being a biatch, but that's
There we
okay.
go. Okay, don't keep not taking those things personally.
I love you. James DiFiore, blackballmedia.ca. Check out his Bullard interview. It's fantastic. Go to blackball.ca for the read. It's a really honest interview that he did with Mike. He transcribed it, talked to him, put it together. It was perfect. There's some video assets there as well. You can go to deanblundell.com for that as well. But tremendous write-up on Bullard. Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm surprised there wasn't a J.K. Rowling question in there at the end of it.
There's still time. I do have access to the back end.
I was shocked. I read the whole thing. I'm like, where the fuck's the J.K. Rowling question?
It's in
I
code.
haven't read
Remember
it.
the Bible
I'm
code?
shocked.
It's in there. It's in there. You just gotta know code.
I'm shocked you haven't read it too, Locke. I told you have to tell Locke what's on the website. Oh, is it really? Okay, go ahead.
James is a writer? I didn't know. I
Yeah,
thought he was
one of the best writers you'll ever read. So go and read his article on Mike Bullard. At Lachlan Cross, you can find him on Twitter, 95.7 Cruise FM at Edmonton, the host of The Locker Room.
New segment, Dr. Locke, next week.
Are you doing Dr. Locke next week? That'd be great.
No, on this.
Yeah, on this show.
I'll bring my couch.
Where I try to help James.
We'll do the wide shot from the couch this time.
Listen, I'm not going to teach people many things, and my gift to mankind is going to be minimal. And
Common sense.
Common sense might be one of them, but I honestly believe that was one of my gifts. At a very, very early age, I realized that if I was going to get through life, I couldn't care about what people thought of me. And the older I get, the more I realize that was a gift of mine. It's kept me sane.
Dude, it's stoic.
I kind of care what you guys think of me because you guys are my coworkers. So I don't know if that applies to this.
I love you. I just wish you'd stop asking people about J.K. Rowling hot damn in the middle of the fucking interview. That'd be great.
Well, the fact that it bothers you makes me just want to ask more people.
I know, and now I'm kind of turned on to the whole idea too. It's weird.
Good. I'm glad we got through this, guys. Break through the other side and everything. It was great.
Fucking rights, huh? Can't do that for an hour and 50 minutes.
Who are we interviewing tomorrow? Who are we interviewing tomorrow? Is tomorrow Maxine?
No, Maxine's the 19th.
Tomorrow is not.
Maybe
Sarah Ayres. Sarah Ayres will be joining us tomorrow. The wife of David Ayres, the goaltender Zamboni driver that beat his own team last year here. She is business owner. You guys will like this. Small business owner losing her business because of this whole thing as she watches parade after parade of people kind of come into the city and not give a shit about anti-maskers. She doesn't like them very much. Plus, she's got a movie coming up about their life. So we got her on the show tomorrow, which is going to be really cool.
That's
she's
really cool.
Fun.
Yeah, you go like this, Dean. When you send a lightning bolt in the private chat, that means I'll ask the J.K. Rowling question. That'll be the signal.
Jesus Christ.
He said it. He said I should do it. Jesus Christ, what?
Just trying to finish, James. I'm just trying to get off this fucking show. That's really all I'm doing at this point.
Oh, fuck.
I got a kid that's waiting for me over there. You won't shut the fuck up. Oh, there he goes.
Yeah. I could help him, honestly, Dean. Honestly, it would it would take some time, but I could help. I would need one-on-one time with him, a lot of one-on-one time.
Yeah, you would need to put him through locker room boot camp.
Yeah. And that's the biggest issue in the world that we have right now is judgment.
Yep.
Right? So how you deal with it for yourself and that's my belief. In the world that we live in right now, the biggest problem we have is that we're all too worried about what people think and we're all too judgmental of other people around us.
Can I make that go just a little bit further? I agree with you.
Yeah.
We're too worried, not just about what people think. We're too worried about a reputation we can't control. We're worried about things we can't control. We want wants more than we want needs, and we don't even know what our needs are. And so when we mix up the wants with the needs, we look for external gratification. And you know what happens when you get external gratification? Whether that's, reputational bump, maybe some money, maybe you get a nicer car than your next guy, your comparison living. When you comparison live, it's fucking death. Yeah. So the issue that a lot of people have is that comparison living. But do you know where it comes from? I've done some research on this subject. It comes from confusing your needs with your wants, right? Mm-hmm. You want to be happy. There's no way an external gratifier is going to make you happy. Money's not going to make you happy. I've had tons of it. Didn't make me happy once. Booze won't make you happy. Parties won't make you happy. Reputation won't make you happy. The only thing that makes people happy today is being grateful for what you have.
Mhm.
It is not confusing what you want with success or getting what you want with being successful. Success truly comes, and I can tell you this, and I would tell James this. We've had private conversations about it. The only place success comes from is by being internally happy, having peace of mind, not worrying, not having anxiety, not having stress. And what you were talking about there is, and I don't know if this is the case with James in a quiet moment, he'd probably tell you the same thing. I think we're all built the same way. How we're built is to reach for approval. Fuck approval. Fuck approval. Do not work for approval. Don't work for someone else to tell you that you did a great job. Fuck that. You do it yourself. You create, then you do it again, then you do it again, and you do it again. And you know who you do it for? You do it for you. Because the process of you doing all those things, if you're a virtuous human being, you'll find happiness because you're not taking care of your want. Sure, everybody wants to control their reputation, but no one does. Nobody. I found that out the hard way. And I'm fucking happy about it because now I know what's important. What's important is my peace of mind and my happiness. So the less people care about not getting what they want, they're not focused on that. They're focused on what they have. And those needs and those wants become irrelevant because your focus is just happiness and being by yourself. And then all of a sudden you stop giving a shit about everybody else. You stop caring about what people think.
I'm glad you brought up gratitude because that's a big thing for me. I don't think I was ever good at it. And so now I go out of my way to thank people for things that they do for me. And letting me be involved in something like this. But
it's not even that. It's internal gratitude. It's knowing that you're thankful.
But you have to practice it in other ways to have gratitude for yourself.
Sure you do.
And again, it sounds like a pretty hippie thing to say, pretty, spiritual thing to say, but I truly believe in it. And again, I'm not very good at it because I judge people immediately when I meet them, right?
Dude, you get paid to judge people.
Well, exactly. But that's, I think, the bigger issue. And then once we judge them, we put them in these little boxes and they never get out of that box. And I'm bad for that as well, right? You'll notice after every podcast, I get on the DM and I go, thanks for having me, guys. Because I believe that in long term will help me. Right?
It's in the practice of being thankful, showing gratefulness.
I absolutely am thankful. And James thinks I'm kissing ass. He makes fun of me whenever I comment about how thankful I am for the fact that you allow me.
Let's fire him.
Anyway, that's he's an interesting duck.
He's the best, dude. We're all different. That's why I don't take it too personally, right? Like he's finding his way, like everybody else is finding their way. And I actually now think the J.K. Rowling thing is a fucking great bit we can put into almost every single interview. I do. I think it's great.
He does get hyper focused on stuff, though.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's okay. It's just who he is. Yeah, he's growing. Everybody's growing. He's fine. All right, I got to go because I got people staring at me and I got to split. But thanks for doing this, Locke. Really appreciate it, brother.
That was fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad you and I got to talk like adults at the end of the show. No offense, Jamesy. Thanks to Nate Erskine Smith. He is the Beaches Liberal MP for East York. Really appreciate him joining us today. Thanks to our friends at Gitch. Ed's got Gitch. Get Gitch. You need it. Gitch3 is your promo code. Go to edsfineimports.com. I wear these all the time. Boxer briefs, pouch to the front. Keeps your junk in there, and you need some in your life. Trust me. Domination.com, DMNTN.com. If you're doing a whole bunch of production stuff, these are the guys. This is the AI. This will change your life. If you're producing a podcast, broadcast, whatever you have, and you don't have enough time to produce promos, etc., DMNTN.com is the name of the company. Black Rose Organics, BlackRoseOrganics.com, better medicine at a better price, the official cannabis partner of DeanBlundell.com. Boy, do we have some news for you at the end of the week. Boy, oh boy, you got your medical card? You approved? Huh? They got the stuff. Anyway, go to shop.blackroseorganics.com. Check them out. Trust me. I was going to read a little thing that someone left. I'll get to it next week, but blackroseorganics.com. We got stuff coming from them as well. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's pretty much it. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Oh, our friends at Blue Microphones. Pardon me. Part of the Blue Crew. The DeanBlundell.com podcast network. All of our podcasters get a whole bunch of Blue stuff. We give it to them because we love them, because it's great stuff. We got MoFi headphones. We got Blue Yeti X USB microphones. We got everything. Blue Microphones, the official supplier of Blundell.com. Have a great day, everybody. I'm out of here. Thanks for listening and watching. Thanks to Nate. Thanks to James. Thanks to Lachlan. We'll see you, I don't know, tomorrow at the same time.
And so I thought, you know what? Fuck, I'm going to run. And I had bought a Speedo, more for comedy than anything. So I bought the Speedo that I didn't really wear very often. So I ran and I threw it on. She comes out of the bathroom.
What happened next?
Oh, that's the greatest joke.
Generally, like the same idea.
Mutants. What do they call those? Titans. Titans. They're Titan animals.
But Hulk's